And welcome back to Morning Show. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very unusual guest for you today, and that is Barel Solomon. So, Barel, you have a YouTube channel. In it, actually, I'll watch you. You're a Jewish businessman, and you give advice to basically people all around the world as to why Jews are successful. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me on the show. 36 years old. I live in Panama. I moved here 2.5 years ago. Lived in Canada my whole life. And I'm really passionate about business, and I'm really passionate about Judaism. So I sort of molded the whole thing together. And when Kanye West, 2 or 3 years ago, started railing against the Jews and talking about how we own everything and how we're the best, business people in the world, and we control the banks and the media, and instead of me shouting anti-Semitism, I said he's right, and let me tell you why. And I guess that's how I started to grow on the internet, is I started to explain to people why Jews are successful at business, and became a little bit of a niche for me.
Yeah, so obviously you've done some really high-profile, let's call them videos. I actually watched two of them. Your first one was actually around tzedakah, the concept of giving charity, and basically why Jews were successful. It was this magic thing they had. Obviously, it's tzedakah, this idea that if you give away a certain percentage, that Hashem
Yes.
has to basically give you a certain percentage to basically allow you to give the amount that you want to pledge. Think that through with me a bit.
So tzedakah in Hebrew means charity, and this is not a foreign concept. I guess the non-Jewish people in the world would call it tithing. And the concept is a biblical concept. It comes from when people used to have crops. That's how people would survive. It's not like today, people make money on cryptocurrencies. How did you become wealthy back in the day? You had a field, you had a crop, and you would grow from the crop. So you would be able to make a circle in the crop, and then the corners you would have to leave for the poor people in the town to take. And it says that based on this, you get blessings, because obviously it's within your control. A person has two choices. You could say, it's my crop, it's my money, it's my labor, it's my hard-earned energy, and therefore I'm not going to give any of it away. But when God sees that you made the conscious decision to give away your hard-earned money, essentially your blood, your sweat, and your tears, God reciprocates in kind, and he says, wow, this person is a good banker. This person is a good steward of my money, because at the end of the day, all money belongs to God. So when God sees that you're a good steward of his money, then he's going to give you more of it. Because at the end of the day, he needs great people to allow for those funds to flow out. And that's the concept behind giving charity, is you want to become a partner with God in your money-making endeavors. And when you do that, God will ultimately give you more. And I give hundreds of thousands of dollars a year away to charity, and I don't look at it as I'm giving money away. I look at it as rather it's an investment that I make. Every dollar I give is an investment. It's the best investment in the world, because God gives me back many, many times what I give.
Yeah, I thought it's very interesting though. There's ways that you phrase it in your video. It's kind of like a mini documentary. It's a 30-minute documentary. If you haven't watched it, ladies and gentlemen, just go watch it. I'll put it in the comment section. But there's something that you say which would be distinctly contrary to what certain Christians would say. You actually say, test God, which obviously many Christians would
Yeah.
say, well, you shouldn't test God. So it's slightly different. You say, no, God wants to be tested, because what she meant to do, she's meant to say, here's my target. Help me do this. I'm going to test you as you help me fulfill what I want to achieve.
Yeah, I don't think it's just many Christians. I think many Jews would also say, you're not allowed to test God. And just because they don't know. And you're actually not allowed to test God. You're not allowed to test God with anything. Except there's one thing that you're allowed to test him with, and that's charity. You could find it in the Bible, in a book called Malachi, in chapter 3:10, where it says, Ubachanuni na bazos, in Hebrew, which means, and you could test me with this. You could test God with one thing, and that's charity. You're not allowed to say, like, I test God if I help this old lady across the street, I'm testing you, God, that you're going to give me a business deal, or I test you that you're going to give me a wife or a husband, whatever. That you're not allowed to do, but you're allowed to test him with one thing, and it's giving charity. And I believe the reason why you're allowed to test him with this one thing is because giving away your money is the single hardest thing for a person to do. Because in order for a person to make money, you have to invest your time, your sweat, your blood, and your tears into making your money. And a person's money is essentially what keeps him alive. That's what buys your food. That's what buys your shelter. That's what buys your clothes. That's what keeps a person going. So when you give away your money, in a sense, you're giving away your life. And that's why God needed to give that commandment, that mitzvah of giving away your money. He had to supercharge it with this reciprocal relationship, because logically, for me to give away my money doesn't make sense. This is what I need to survive. Even if a person has $10 million, let's say the person's 40 years old and he has $10 million. A person's life expectancy is to live to 80 years old. You need that 10 million bucks. There's almost no amount of money that guarantees a person peace of mind. So in order to give away money, a person needs to have some sort of super rational incentive to do that. And the incentive is that when you give away money, you will not become poor. As a matter of fact, Maimonides, the Rambam, says that it's never happened in history that a person became poor from giving charity.
I'm actually curious on that. So you're an Orthodox Jew, right? So you'd class yourself as an Orthodox Jew.
I try to be, yes.
So for
Yes,
those of you
I'm
in
trying my
the
best.
audience who don't know, there's a number of, let's call it categories of Jews. Obviously, you get Hasidic, you get Ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative. And you're an Orthodox Jew.
Only one type of Jew. A Jew, a lot of people don't know what Jews are. Jews are people that descend from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're a family, essentially. Now, the classifications, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, modern, all these Hasidic, all these things are sort of labels that we gave to ourselves. At the end of the day, a person who's completely not observant whatsoever, meaning they go and they eat bacon and they, don't observe anything, the Sabbath, they don't give charity, they don't put on tefillin, whatever it is, that person is, if you had spiritual goggles and you measured them against the most Orthodox Jewish guy in the middle of Jerusalem that you could find, if you had spiritual goggles, they would be indistinguishable. They would be exactly the same. So yes, I feel that that's an important factor. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'll ask you a very simple question. You put on tefillin today?
Yes, I put on tefillin every day. Yes.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I actually watched your other documentary as well, which is around Mashiach, the Messiah. You basically said the news to come, right?
Yes.
Very interesting concept behind that video. So you explained in that video that you had a kind of a target, I think, of what you wanted to achieve in that video. Are you happy with where that video went?
Yeah. So what Byron is referring to, what you're referring to is I created a movie called Finding Mashiach. So in Judaism, we do not believe that the Messiah came yet. Unlike Christians who believe that, Jesus was the Messiah, we don't believe that the Messiah came yet. What's our proof is that it says in the era of Mashiach, in the era of Messiah, there's not going to be any war. There's not going to be any more famine. And the third temple will be rebuilt, and all the Jewish people are going to come back to Jerusalem and serve God at what you would call the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall today. There's going to be a third temple that's going to be built there. There was a first one, second one, and there's going to be eventually a third one. And if you look at the world today, the world is an absolute disaster. The world is in turmoil, ravaged by war, ravaged by hunger, ravaged by, anti-Semitism. And in the era of Mashiach, this one man will bring about an era of peace. How is he going to do that? He's going to reveal godliness in the world. So if I'm going through the world and I look at the physicality of the world, and I look at this cup, for example, this can, I don't see godliness in this can. I see a piece of metal. When Mashiach will come, godliness will be revealed in the world to a point where I'm going to see how this can is nothing more than God's word giving life to this can at every single moment. So I made a movie called Finding Mashiach, which essentially went to go travel the world to interview the greatest minds of our generation to help explain what Mashiach is. Because even Jews, by the way, Orthodox Jews, we pray for it 3 times a day, but very few people have any understanding really of what Mashiach is. And it's even more confused by the Christian view and the Muslim view of what Mashiach is, especially since they think it came already. So this is a really misunderstood topic within the not only the non-Jewish world, but even within the Jewish world itself.
Yeah, the Muslim view of it is far more complicated and very difficult to understand in some instances, because obviously they believe that
They don't understand it because they lack the humility to understand that in order for them to know what Mashiach is,
Mm.
they have to ask their older brothers, the Jewish people. The problem is Muslims have a tendency to attack Jewish people. I'm sorry if I'm going off topic over here. Okay, they have a tendency. They have this weird tendency that they would like to wipe us out, but
Mm.
instead of approaching us with humility, with love, and saying, "Hey, can you teach us? We come from you. We are your brothers, cousins." We would open up all of our knowledge to them, and we would open up everything that we know to them. The problem is that they have their own ideas of how things work, but all the Abrahamic religions that come from Judaism, it's all just an offshoot of Judaism. So the reason why they're not clear is because they take what we write, they take what's written, they take the prophecies, and they sort of twist them and skew them for their own image.
Mm. That's right. I think it's a bit weird though, because there's some strange stuff that occurs in the Quran. So as you'll know, in the Quran they refer to Jesus as Isa, and they do believe that Jesus will come back on the second coming. But then there were some strange things that occurred. I'm sure you know this. You've been to Israel. I know you have. But the actual gates into Israel, where Jesus is meant to walk in order to get into them, Salah ad-Din actually used to bury the bodies of some of the soldiers there. And as you know, underneath the custom is that you can't walk over that ground because it's unclean. And the idea behind doing that was actually to stop them ever being able to walk back to Jerusalem. So you couldn't, because the road was unclean or spiritually unclean. It's quite weird when you believe that this is something that should be done, but actually I'm going to actively stop it from occurring. So very, very odd approach. But your documentary, I know you had a certain figure in it. You wanted so many people to see it. Were you happy with the responses you got?
I wanted it to get 10 million views.
Mm.
It's hovering around 600,000 or 700,000 today. But I'm pleased. I'm very pleased with the response that it got.
Mm.
I think that it shed a lot of light on a very complex topic.
So to actually shift the topic slightly, obviously, what's your views at the moment on the deal that the Prime Minister or the President of Israel has got for the release of the hostages in Gaza?
Look, the Jewish people were midgets on the shoulders of giants. What I mean by that is, it doesn't really matter what I think. I'm just a simple guy. I want to know what Torah thinks about the hostage deal. I want to know what Torah's opinion is, because we have a 3,300-year-old tradition which was given to us at Mount Sinai, which very clearly tells us what is right and what is wrong. So this is not the first hostage deal that the Jewish people unfortunately have been faced with. We live in a very funny way where a person only lives for 80 years. So our experience with the physical world is only as good as our time is on this earth. And that's how usually people look at it, is they've the psyche, the collective psyche of the world right now, because since we're so far after the Holocaust and most of those people have passed away, most of the survivors have passed away, this is really the first mass hostage situation that the Jewish people have had to deal with in this 60 or 70 year period of time. So everybody has an opinion. Is it right or is it wrong the way that we're dealing with it? It's a very immature way of looking at history at a current situation. Why? Because we as Jews have 3,300 years of, call it, experience mixed with divine wisdom, that we're able to look at the world through that lens. So when you ask me what's my opinion doesn't matter. I'm 36 years old. It's like asking an ant what his opinion is of the sun, when I could ask an astrologer his opinion of the sun, right? So I want to know what Torah's perspective is. And if you're curious what Torah's perspective is, there's books, encyclopedias written on how to handle hostage situations when it comes to the Jewish people. I'll give you a small example. You're not allowed to redeem a hostage. Is a very big mitzvah. It's a big commandment. It's a good deed. But you're not allowed to redeem hostages for an exorbitant amount of money. Why? Or an exorbitant, in this case would be an exorbitant amount of terrorists. Why? Because it encourages the enemy to continue their tactic. Meaning, if they took hostages, God forbid, and they saw that through taking the hostages, we didn't budge an inch and they got no benefit from taking hostages, well, it's very unlikely that they would take hostages again. But when they see that when they take hostages, for example, in the case of Gilad Shalit, which was a hostage situation where one soldier was taken many years ago, they released 1,000 prisoners for this one hostage. So they see they're not stupid people. They're actually very intelligent people. When they see that their tactics work, this is their business. They are in the business of terrorism. So when they see a strategy is working, they see, how could I grow my business? So I took one hostage, I got 1,000 terrorists. What happens if I take 230 hostages? How many terrorists can I get out in that case? So what is my opinion of it? My opinion is, what does Torah say about it? And let's follow that. And that's where the Jewish people have to get back to. We have to stop living in this world of public opinion, because according to public opinion, the craziest things today are considered socially acceptable. So if we live our lives according to 2025, we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble, because the world is so lost. So Jews have to measure their values against 3,300 years of past experience mixed with divine wisdom, versus living within the complete chaos, the ebbs and flows of chaos that we find ourselves in 2025.
Yeah. So I actually did a video on this, and actually I explained many of the things that you just talked about. You know, this idea that, as you know, in Judaism, you can't overpay for hostages. And if you looked at the numbers, I think the numbers were like 1 Israeli per 500. I think it was like 1 to 500 was the ratio that they would pay.
Whatever it was ridiculous.
It was pretty high. So I must, yeah, from a personal perspective, it did seem a little bit like overpayments. But obviously, a lot of people were very jubilant. They're very happy to see people return.
Look, it's easy for you and I to say, because thank God we don't have family or friends or relatives that are in that position. and we ourselves are not in that position. So, there's this constant battle that we have between what's intellectually right and which is what the heart wants, which is, those gushy images of hostages coming home. So it's easy to, play hardball when it's not your friends and family that are in captivity. So, but again, Jews will continue to lose as long as our direction is not governed by Torah. And Jews will win, as Donald Trump says, they'll win bigly if our decisions are governed by Torah.
I think it's interesting, though, that some of the people have commented, obviously, on the state of the individuals returning to Israel once being released, because you can actually see the comparison. So a lot of the Hamas guys are obviously leaving the prisons, they're going back to Gaza. They seem to be well fed, they're in good health, and a lot of the people coming out of captivity from the Palestine side, not so great. Like they're saying that they look equivalent to having got some of the people out of the concentration camps in World War II. So does it look like they've been kept in good health? But it does seem like the peace deal is breaking apart now. I don't know if you have a view on that, but it looks like it's not going to hold.
I'm at a loss for words. Again, I'm going to have the same answer. Trump came out with his plan to take control of Gaza. I'm curious what Torah has to say about it. I'm curious if that is a sound plan according to Torah or not. What does 3,300 years of history mixed with, 3,300 years of history mixed with divine wisdom, what does it have to say about that plan? Is it a sound plan or not? Should we be encouraging it or not? What I truly think is that the world is begging the Jews to stand up and to claim their rightful place within the world, and to say unabashedly that we are the chosen people. We are chosen by God himself to be the stewards of his light into this world, and to be the people that will guide the world on what is right and what is wrong, and to not be ashamed of that role. I just heard recently that the first prime minister of Israel, remind me his name.
Which one?
First prime minister of Israel. Minister of Israel. Ben Gurion. That's right. I heard recently that the first prime minister of Israel, Ben Gurion, he was standing in front of world leaders, and he said that each nation is chosen. It's not just the Jewish people. Each nation is chosen by God for their particular mission. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very upset when he heard this, because it's downplaying the role of the Jewish people. The other nations were not chosen. The Jewish nation was chosen. And when Jews are strong and proud about this fact, the world will respect us for who we truly are, because it's the truth. As long as we try to dodge that, and as long as we try to fight that, and as long as we try to play it down, we will always be at the back of the bus.
What's your view on this whole idea that Donald Trump actually wants to get rid of the Palestinians from Gaza, and obviously, take it over and have it as the new Dubai of Israel's region? He hasn't really fleshed out the plan.
I think that he is a person who is a visionary, and he approaches problems from a very different perspective, meaning this two-state solution that we've been hearing about for decades is not a solution. What's the proof? It hasn't solved anything. And we gave Gaza away 17 years ago, we gave it to the Palestinians, and we see that not only did they not build the state, but they used that place to try to destroy the state of Israel. So therefore, this whole two-state solution is more of a two-state delusion. Two-state solution is a nice way for politicians to put off, to defer the problem of Arabs and Muslims living violently in Israel against Jews. That's the polite way for them to defer that onto the next generation or the next political party. It's a nice talking point, but it doesn't mean anything. Here comes Donald Trump and says, really, if you read between the lines, what is he really trying to say? Muslims and Arabs that are living in Gaza can no longer live in the land of Israel. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. Read between the lines. He says, he cloaks it. He said, we're going to build it. It's going to be so nice. And it's going to be we're going to, place them in a nice place and all these nice, but really what he's trying to say is, we gave you a shot, Arabs. We gave you a shot to live with the Jews. You couldn't do it peacefully. And now you have to leave. And again, going back to Torah, what's Torah's perspective on Arabs and Muslims living in the land of Israel? It's not a Jewish land where only Jews are allowed to live. Anybody's allowed to live there as long as they live there peacefully. As soon as they present a threat to the Jewish inhabitants of the land, they have to leave. And the Palestinians have overstayed their welcome. And Donald Trump has recognized that they've overstayed their welcome, and he proposed a solution for that.
Yeah. I had a slightly different reading from it, and that was obviously the Arab nations quite often want to criticize Israel for its handling of the situation, but nobody's ever prepared to offer a solution. So he gave one. And his answer was, give me a better solution. And to date, till right now, as of time recording, they still haven't given one. And I believe that's what he was doing. He was forcing them to go, you guys have got lots to say, but where's the solutions? What is your option? And they don't have any.
I don't think Donald Trump is as sophisticated and as everybody thinks he is. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think he thinks much more than 2 steps ahead. I really do think he's a simple guy, and I think his brilliance is actually in his simplicity. I do think that he really does mean it, that he wants to remove all Palestinians from Israel, from Gaza. I do believe that. Now, if they come up with a plan and the Arabs come up with a plan and the Arab League nations, and great. But for now, they have to get out. I think he's much more simplistic than people realize.
It's an interesting approach he's taken. Talking of approaches, I don't know if you know much about, obviously, as we discussed before we recorded, I'm currently in South Africa. You obviously know that South Africa took Israel to the ICJ, genocide allegations against Israel.
Yeah, they're wonderful people.
The ANC government has some very interesting reasons for why they may or may not have pursued that case. Obviously, I live in South Africa, so I have to be slightly measured in what I say. But there is an allegation that the ANC government was broke, and they were actually a governing party about to get their headquarters repossessed for failing to pay their debts, and their actual political party being made bankrupt. And amazingly, they were in debt for the tune of just under $500 million, which, rand is obviously funny money. It's basically monopoly money, but still was a sizable amount of money. And magically, they suddenly had money from, some people allege, Iran, that meant that they could then have this money to pay off their debts. And accidentally and coincidentally, a week later, they also issued their case against Israel and the ICJ. A lot of that is speculation, if you know what I mean. Yeah, that's the conspiracy theory, and I'm sure you know the difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact. It's roughly around 6 months. I don't know. What was your view of them taking Israel to court?
I don't know enough about South Africa. Like, what's their history with Jews? I mean, is there a history of anti-Semitism there?
There actually isn't, which is the peculiar part. So the actual ANC, when it was set up, many moons
I mean,
ago.
I see those guys that do that dance, you know the one I'm talking about, where they're screaming and right. Those guys are the indigenous people. They seem to be pretty favorable towards the Jewish people.
Mm, well,
Um,
when the ANC was set up way back when, they were also part of the South African Communist Party, and many of the top brass of the South African Communist Party were Jewish. So many of their original funders were Jewish. For the longest time,
how
South
many
Africa.
Jews? How many Jews are in South Africa?
Actually, there were quite a few. So at the end of apartheid, there were just over 100,000, but that number has now declined. A lot of the Jewish communities have shrunk quite a bit, and many of them have kind of congregated in basically the central locations. So the biggest Jewish community in South Africa is in Cape Town, and then there's a kind of a smaller Jewish community in Johannesburg, which is obviously where the chief rabbi of South Africa lives, Rabbi Goldstein. And then there's a even smaller community in Durban, but it's basically Cape Town and Johannesburg. But the number has shrunk. I mean, as you know,
Durban. That's where the famous anti-Semitic Durban conference has been held.
that's the one.
So South Africa has a terrible track record of anti-Semitism. The whole Durban conference is around taking down Israel.
Yeah, but that's only really kind of a recent thing because, as I say, at the end of apartheid, many of the Jews were actually involved in the ANC. But as time has progressed, it has seemed to shift, and that's why you can actually see it in terms of demographics. The numbers used to be quite big, but they're drastically shrinking over time, with many individuals saying they no longer feel comfortable here.
It's a shame. Whatever it is, it's a shame. I don't know what happened, what didn't happen. Whatever it is a shame. And all I know is this: is that the Bible says, Torah says that whoever blesses the Jewish people is blessed, and whoever curses the Jewish people is cursed.
Mhm.
And South Africa and whichever country has kicked out the Jews or has made them feel uncomfortable ultimately becomes cursed. Just look at Germany. It happened to have been the superpower of the world. And as soon as they turned on the Jews, look what happened to them. Look at Spain. Spain used to be the center of civilization. Look at it now. What's Spain? Look at Rome. Rome used to control the entire world. And they turned on the Jews, and look what ended up happening to them. Any country, and unfortunately, the United States is beginning to be in that same boat, which is scary. So any country that turns on the Jews ultimately ends up destroyed. And not because the Jews destroyed it, but because Jews are the canary in the coal mine. Have you heard this before?
Cool.
So a canary, they used to bring canaries into coal mines, and canaries were so sensitive to the toxic gases that as soon as there was toxic gas in the air, the canary would die first, and that would be a sign to the miners that it's time to get out. So the Jews are the most spiritually sensitive people in a nation, in a country. And when you see that the Jews are beginning to be attacked, that is a very dangerous sign for the society that something is seriously wrong in society. Something has become toxic.
It's actually leads on to a good topic, one that we discussed. I was hoping we'd actually get an opportunity to discuss. So you are American, but you moved to Panama.
Canadian.
So you're Canadian. Sorry. Thank you for
pretty
correcting me.
soon, we're going to be the 51st state.
Yeah. Trump has his way. Then again, everybody's good. There's going to be a 52nd and a 53rd. Yeah. He seems to be doing what no American president has seemed to want to do before. And that's like, he's like, oh, well, we might as well just colonize everybody else. They told us we colonize this.
It would be great. It would be the best thing that ever happened to Canada. But anyways, I threw you off your train of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
So you moved from Canada to Panama.
Yeah.
What was the rationale behind that? You must have had a very good rationale.
My wife's family lives here.
Okay. So they retired there.
No, they live here. They're in business here.
Oh, fantastic. And what do you think of Panama?
I love it. Phenomenal. Great place. Great place. Good weather. Favorable taxes. Respectful to the Jewish people.
Mm.
Great place.
I actually watched the documentary that you were involved in, where you talked about the Jews of Panama. I don't know if you know the one I'm referring to. And obviously
I don't.
you were interviewed as part of that. You basically talked about the Jewish community in Panama. Do you see it as being a thriving, growing community? Is it a place that you'd recommend raising your family?
It's hard if you're not from the community, if you're not Spanish.
Is it?
Like, I don't know how people from South Africa would fit in here.
Mm.
I actually don't recommend it if you're not a Latin. Latin culture is very different from North American or European or African culture.
In what way how would you describe that?
It's just its own flavor. They're their own. It's its own. They're not like us. You know, like they. You know, they're their own flavor of people. Beautiful people. I love them, but I think because I'm married to one and I was able to integrate into their culture because first of all, I've been coming here on and off for 11 years. So I vacation here for 11 years. So I was slowly introduced to it. But it's its own flavor. Latins are they're very warm. They're very loud. They're very together. They're very few boundaries and barriers between Latin people. They're more chilled. But yet they're forward thinking at the same time. Like there are lots. Like they laugh when Americans come here, they call them gringos, and they laugh at Americans. And I never understood this until I moved here. You could spot a gringo from a mile away because they're just like ducks, and Latins are like tigers. It's very interesting.
Sounds like Afrikaans girls. If you've ever met Afrikaans girls, pretty much you described it to the T.
Who?
So the native population here in South Africa is descendants of Dutch colonialists. They're called Afrikaners.
Which population?
The white Afrikaner in South Africa is a descendant of Dutch settlers.
Yeah.
And many of them, so they're called Afrikaners. So Afrikaner is basically the Dutch word for basically an African. So they called themselves Afrikaners. And Afrikaans skills are similar, very similar.
It sounds quite interesting. I need
Maybe you need to come.
I need to learn more about South Africa.
I appreciate you running out of time. I
Yes.
do appreciate you joining me to have a chat with me.
Byron, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's do it again.
Take it easy, bud. Cheers.
Be well.
And you. Bye.